Hi, everybody. I'm Jeannie Walters. I'm super glad you're here with us today. A lot of customer experience leaders often think that it's really about the customers that are your happiest or the customers who are grumbling the most. And today we're going to talk about those customers in the middle, the ones who maybe don't make as much noise, but suddenly drift away and aren't your customers anymore. So today we're talking about 5 ways to reduce churn for you and your organization. And I'm always thrilled to hear about where you're joining us from and what the weather is like where you are. Today I'm in Chicago as usual, and it is raining. We are experiencing a lot of rain over these last couple of days. So hopefully it's a nice, beautiful day wherever you are. As always, we have David Hornerick, our Director of Marketing with us. Hi, David. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you. And I hope that you are experiencing some nice weather in Seattle. What's the verdict?
Nice is relative. It is sunny and warm. On Sunday, it's supposed to get up to 109 degrees, which
Oh,
is unprecedented. So,
yeah.
luckily, I'll be in the air conditioning and all will be fine. But yeah, maybe a little too nice.
Yeah. One of the newscasters from Chicago who now lives in California, who I'm
Mhm.
friendly with, she posted something about the heat wave on the West Coast and said, I did a lot of these stories about cold weather in the Midwest, and now I'm doing extreme heat out on the West Coast. And she said, really, don't be dumb. Same rule applies.
Yeah,
I thought that was pretty funny. Just,
yeah,
yeah.
that's good
So there
advice.
we are. There we are. So good. Well, do we have people joining? Should we go ahead and get started? What do you
Yeah, we've
think?
got people joining. Saptarshi is here watching on YouTube. Hey, Saptarshi,
Excellent.
always
Good to
good
see
to
you.
see you. Hope the weather's nice in your neck of the woods as well. Yeah, let's go ahead and dive in.
Excellent. Well, thank you everybody for being here with us. We are always glad to hear from you, glad to know that you are interested in these topics. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jeannie Walters, and I am founder and CEO of Experience Investigators. We help our organizations who want to deliver meaningful customer experiences to deliver business results. And we do that through keynote speaking and training and workshops, as well as executive coaching. And then also through things like this. We share a lot of our content because we want you to be empowered to make change in your organization to really deliver on those meaningful customer experiences. So you can find us in all these different places. We love to hear from you. So go ahead and reach out when you can. So today we are talking about at-risk customers. And the question I have for you is, do you know who your at-risk customers even are, where they are in their journey, and where they might drift off to? Now, the reason I'm asking these questions is because a lot of leaders that I work with actually don't know the answers to these questions. Leaders need to challenge their teams to consider the quiet but not quite gone at risk leaving customers. This is something that we identify in a lot of the journey mapping work that we do, a lot of the consulting that we do. And then there's research showing that, there are certain antecedents to customer loyalty. There were 4 that were identified: satisfaction, commitment, trust, and image. Now, all of these factors require attention and intention, and neglect is really the opposite of all of those things. And yet we often neglect customers, neglect parts of their journey without even knowing we're doing so, simply because our attention and intention isn't focused in the right place. So if you know who your at-risk customers are, you want to develop a strategy around that. But first you need to identify them. So how do you know who your at-risk customers are? One idea is to evaluate renewal data. This can give you a lot of information if you actually look at what are the parts of the customer journey that either lead to higher renewals or lower renewals. Are there patterns that maybe tell you that these customers are considering leaving before they don't renew with your organization, before they let that contract expire or just don't sign up again for your service? You want to review milestones along the customer journey. Are there certain milestones where maybe sentiment goes down, where you hear feedback from customers saying, yeah, this is fine, but it's not great, after they've been reporting that other milestones are great? Because as people move through any relationship, there's often a period of a honeymoon period where they're really happy. Then they start seeing some of the cracks in the veneer and they think, maybe this isn't as great as it was. And then they're kind of complacent. You want to look for those points of complacency with your customers to see if you can amp up those positive moments and make sure that you carry them through the journey with attention and intention. And then you want to turn complaints into opportunities. When we are looking at complaints, it's really easy to consider that one loud complainer is just, a grump, somebody who we don't really need to listen to. But when you really examine the complaint, if there's merit to it, there are probably many, many, many other customers. In fact, we know this. There are other customers who will never say anything, who will never be that loud complainer. And so you need to really look at those loud complaints and look for clues and themes and patterns that maybe other customers aren't willing to say anything about, but exist. So once you understand who these folks are, you want to take that one step further. And we're going to talk today about 5 ways to understand at-risk customers. Identify what happens when a customer defects. Set up alerts to get more details. Know the ideal customer journey. This is a big one. Don't be afraid of the exit interview. This is a tool in our toolbox that we probably don't use often enough. And then we also want to treat former customers like friends and not enemies. So let's dig into these now. So first of all, let's identify what happens when a customer defects. And what do I mean by this? Well, this is when we actually look at, you know what? There are customers who throw a big fit when they leave, right? When they just tell you, I'm never shopping here again and I'm going to your competitor. We know those stories. Those are hard to forget. But we also have stories that people say, well, I was going to renew with you, or I was going to buy with you again, but this, and this led me to your competitor. We want to have a place to capture the whole spectrum of those stories somewhere where we can refer to that. It's really good data to have. It also helps us as customer experience leaders tell the story of our customers in the right way to the leaders who need to invest in these programs. So storytelling is super powerful here, because your customers might not be telling you specifically in your data, in their customer feedback, why they're leaving. But we hear these stories anecdotally. Your contact center agents certainly hear them. Your frontline workers certainly hear them. We want to make sure that we are capturing these stories, because that helps us identify when a customer defects. So make sure you share them as part of your customer experience updates and really tell your customer story this way. You also want to set up alerts to get more details. So set up triggers at certain intervals throughout the onboarding process. Specifically, those first 90 to 100 days can be very, very important in the customer journey. So proactively reach out, proactively set up ways to check in with the customer and see if they need support. What we hear a lot about customer neglect is that it actually happens earlier in the journey than we expect it to. So it's not just that kind of complacent, I've been a customer for a while and I'm just not getting what I need anymore. Sometimes it starts and it actually triggers some buyer's remorse. So we want to look at that early part of the journey and set up some very proactive triggers to reach out and ask for input. So instead of just making it about sales, instead of just making it about the training and webinars about your product, make sure you're reaching out throughout that journey and asking for input from the customer. It's also a great way to say to a customer, you know what, if this part is a struggle or a challenge or uncomfortable for you, let me tell you what other customers did. Let me tell you how we worked with other customers. People want to know that they're not in this alone. They want to know that they're part of something. So that's a great way to handle that early stage and avoid that neglect to begin with. And then, of course, we want to know the ideal customer journey. We want to know it, understand it, and watch for ways to support it and proactively move it forward. So, when we think about how customers engage with our brand, with our products and our services, that can vary pretty dramatically from industry and brand and everything else. But if you know what that looks like, if you know what ideal engagement looks like for your brand, for your industry, then that means that you can start designing better experiences that proactively avoid that neglect, that make sure that we are looking for ways to keep engagement up. Because if we know that customers are engaged, they are a lot less likely to drift off. This is true for almost every industry, almost every brand. If you think about something like a hotel brand, if they're traveling and they're not booking with your hotel every time, that tells you they're not quite as engaged. If they maybe aren't using the app like they should, if they aren't using your product on a regular basis, all of those clues tell you that these people are thinking, this isn't really for me because they're not actually actively using the product or service. So, a little attention here, making sure that you know what that ideal customer journey looks like, and then proactively helping customers engage however is appropriate in your industry can be a very powerful way to help them feel like you're paying attention to them. Because a lot of neglect is simply, what customers report about neglect. It's simple things. It's things like, what? I have not heard from this organization at any time except when they want to sell me something. When you hear things like that, that tells you that maybe you don't know the ideal customer journey and there's work to be done about ways to engage beyond the sale, beyond billing, beyond those very transactional points. We want to build that relationship in meaningful ways. Don't be afraid of the exit interview. This one, I love to talk about interviews because I think they can be so powerful in hearing the customer's real words, hearing about what really did drive them away. When when customers leave and we invite them to tell us about it, not all of them will want to participate. So you have to be prepared for that. Some of them are just going to move on and not want to invest any more time in that relationship. But some will want to participate this way. And it's our job to ask those hard questions about why they left and about who ended up serving their needs better. Because if we can find that information out, we can find out what expectations are changing throughout all of our customers. Where are they seeing things in the competitive environment that maybe we're not doing yet that we should? Or maybe it's more about culture. We hear this a lot. Just like customer feedback often will identify specific employee names when they're praising, when you ask about why people leave, sometimes that's based on an employee leaving. We hear this over and over where somebody will say, well, so and so was my account rep, and then he left, and I just didn't trust anybody else. What that tells you is you have to start instilling best practices in your customer journey for everyone so that it's not up to one employee, so that you can learn from those superstars that, maintain that loyalty. But then it also gives you an opportunity to say, yeah, we thought that might be the reason and we're working on it. We also want to inform our roadmap with this. Sometimes people will tell us very specific things about our products or services that they wish that we had. And when that happens, what a great opportunity to say, you know what? We're going to put that into our roadmap. Can I follow up with you when we actually implement that feature? Or guess what? That's already in our roadmap. Let me tell you about it when it happens. This is an amazing thing to do because people feel like they're being heard and that we're closing the loop with them in a very personal way. So there's a lot to do with exit interviewing. And we actually have some interview guides out there that can help you. So if you're interested, you can use some of the customer interview guides that we have available as part of our Year of CX program. Those are free to download. So go ahead and take advantage of those. And then the last thing here is something that, again, we see over and over. We tend to think of customers as customers or not customers. So the minute they leave us, we kind of lump them in with everybody else who is not a customer. And so suddenly customers who have been with us for years, they're lumped into this prospect category and they start receiving emails and sales pitches and all these things as if they don't know your product, as if they don't know your brand, as if you don't know them. And what an opportunity to address this group as the former customers that they are. Somebody that knows your brand, knows your product, and had a solid relationship with your brand. So it's time to stay in touch in a way that, again, is meaningful to them. So instead of just sliding them into that sales category again, think about them as, you know what, how can we win this group back? Some of you probably have win back campaigns. Those can be very effective as long as they're not, we treat that as a campaign and then we still pitch them on everything else as if they're a brand new prospect that doesn't know our brand. One of the things we hear over and over from customers is that we as customers want to be recognized for who we are and where we are in the journey. So if we are not doing that for former customers, then we are shutting the door on opportunities to actually get them back into our brand, to get them back even into a place where maybe they'd recommend us, or maybe they would say to somebody, you know what, we don't use them anymore, but here's why you should. So there's so much upside to this. And yet a lot of organizations still just dump the former customers into the prospect category. And it can feel very jarring as a customer to get that email that says, here's why you should like our brand, or here's why we think this product is right for you after you've been a customer for 5 years or something. So make sure that we're treating them like we have a relationship. That can go a long way. So a couple ways to understand at risk, to look for these things. You want to identify what happens when a customer defects. Why do they defect? Is there a certain milestone on the journey? Is there something that they can really share with us that makes sense? So look at your customer journey, look at those data points, and really listen to customers at those certain times where it's likely that they might defect. Set up alerts, make sure that you're using those triggers to really provide some outreach to customers who maybe aren't using the product as much, who aren't behaving in a way that makes them an engaged customer. We want to know that ideal customer journey. What do our best customers do, and how can we help customers really engage along the way proactively as well? We don't want to be afraid of that exit interview. You can get so much information. You can get so much information that way. I really do encourage that. And finally, we want to treat former customers like friends, not enemies, because those folks that have drifted away, they might drift back if we are actually actively looking at them as, you know what, we've had a relationship, we know who you are, and we're here to support you in the next chapter. So finally here, I want to pose this to you. Do you have a strategy around at-risk customers? Because they're still customers, but we tend to invest a lot in those very happy customers, and we create advocacy programs and lots of amazing things that are super important. We tend to focus on the customers who are very loud and unhappy. And yet we have this whole spectrum of customers in the middle who might not be telling us as much as we want them to, but are still showing us through their actions and behavior that they're feeling neglected, that maybe they aren't as engaged as they should be, that they are that group that is at risk of drifting off to your competitor without a word. And so we want to make sure that as customer experience leaders, we're not forgetting about this big section of customers, and we're investing in understanding them, understanding their journey, and then recognizing them for where they are. So what methods will you use? What methods do you use? I'm really curious about your strategy and your approach with at-risk customers. So David, do we have questions? And, in the beginning of this, we didn't even mention that this was an Ask Me Anything webinar. So we probably should have done that. So feel free to drop in questions and let us know, anything you want to ask. Now's your chance.
Absolutely. Let's start with an experience share from Tyler. So Tyler says, I had a best-in-class experience on an exit interview as a consumer that I want to share. I decided to leave Farmers Insurance after a 10-year relationship, and when I spoke to the retention team, I let them know they had a less than 1% chance of saving my business, of retaining him. They told me upfront their goal wasn't to keep my business. It was to make things right for me and make sure that no one else experienced what I did. And it cuts off, but he goes on to say, I was compelled at that point to help them avoid ruining another customer's day the way several of mine had been ruined.
Wow. That's a great story. That's a great story. And I love that that was the approach. I agree that maybe they should call that team something else. But I think that's a wonderful way of approaching it, because one of the things that we've seen is that sometimes brand leaders think that customers are complaining or leaving or want to just kind of vent on the way out, uh, as almost revenge, if they're unhappy customers. Most customers don't want that. They want exactly what you talked about, Tyler. They want to make sure other people don't have to experience a situation that they didn't want to experience to begin with. So I think part of this is having faith in each other, having giving people credit, giving people the benefit of the doubt that their intentions are good. And that can be easier said than done in the work that we do, but I think that's a wonderful example. So thanks for sharing that.
And I want to highlight a comment from Thais and then go to a question from Thais.
Excellent.
So first, she says, I see comments like this kind of referring to connecting on a human level is when this
Mhm.
comment came in. At Affinity Design Facebook page, people leaving comments that they left company Big a Big A company, to come
Mhm.
to another company, specifically because they're relating to the people there, not the
Mhm.
products, but the people and that human connection.
Yep. Yep. I think that's very true. And I think as companies scale up, that gets harder. And so that's why it's so important to really know who you are as a brand. What are your values? What is your vision? What is your customer experience mission? All of these things that we've talked about, because that allows your people to show up in a certain way. But if they don't have those guideposts, then we're basically saying show up however you want. And so that's really, that can be the big difference as you scale as an organization, to have those foundational pieces right. Make sure everybody in your employee base is really on board with all of those things. So yeah, people, people, people.
Mm-hmm. Love that. All right, now let's get into the question.
Great.
I'm currently running some social media research, social listening, to get qualitative insights to improve our storytelling, because our message isn't resonating well with our audience. We're seeing low engagement.
Mhm.
It's a bit trickier than expected. I can definitely empathize with
Mhm.
that. So many voices to be analyzed. Any feedback?
Yeah. Well, social media is great, and it's also really challenging for exactly those reasons. I think sometimes we talk about this in our own organization, like where is the noise versus the, the data, the real voice of the customer. And so I would say, there's some great, amazing tools out there that use AI and some other things to really help filter through that. But if you don't have those resources, I would look for who are your customers? Who are your ideal customers? And make sure you're narrowing in on that feedback, because it is really easy to get lost in the amount of just variation and data and everything else on social media. And so I would say if you can, cross reference, make sure you're really looking at the people who are your customers, or who are the customers that you most want to serve, that are most aligned with your vision and values. If you can narrow that down, that can give you a little bit more information. There are things like sentiment analysis that can be helpful. There are different tools out there, but that's where I like to start, is who are these people really, and how can we really listen to them in a powerful way. But I feel for you on that one.
And Jeannie, if you'll indulge me, coming from a marketing
Yes,
and
please.
content background, this definitely resonates with me. It's a constant struggle. One thing that I've found, and I don't know what Thais, what your social posting has been like, but I know that oftentimes when companies are trying to tell the story of their brand, it's me, me, me. It's all about what the brand does and how great they are. And sometimes that doesn't resonate with audiences if it doesn't provide some sort of value or relevance to what the audience is trying to achieve. And
Mhm.
so oftentimes almost telling the story of your target audience and how you support their story can be really, really powerful in a way that's valid to them and that they want to engage with. So just something that I found, and again,
Yep.
so much harder to execute than to, you know, plan for.
It's a great point. It's a great point, and I think what an opportunity to tell your customer stories, right? Like,
Mhm.
make your customer the hero of the story, and other people will be able to relate to that and different things. So I think that's a really, really important point.
Absolutely. I want to jump to a question that came in through email. We already did link to the customer interview guidebook and intake form, but we've got another question here that came in about exit interviews.
Mhm.
They say, we do exit surveys, not exit interviews. We do exit surveys and have had some success. Are there any specific questions you'd recommend for an exit interview or exit survey to elicit a really useful response?
Mm. Yeah, I think part of it is just being consistent about asking. Sometimes we are selective about who we ask for an exit interview. And the more consistent we can reach out to customers, that can help a lot because then you will get more valid and valuable feedback that way. I would also say Tyler illustrated this beautifully. Make it about, you know what, we're doing this because we want to learn and we want to make sure that we provide better value, better experiences for our customers. Because if we don't frame it that way, then it sounds like we're just trying to sell to them. It sounds like we're just trying to get them back. And I think it's part of kind of showing up in a really humble way and saying, you know what, we are really interested in what you have to say. We are not going to sell you anything. We are not going to, this isn't about getting you back. This is about making sure that we can improve for other customers based on what you tell us. I think that's the most important kind of wrapping to have around it. And there, you can incentivize these. Those have some mixed results because some people feel like it's a bribe. So you have to be a little careful with that. But if you have any sort of ongoing relationship with the customer, maybe through customer success or account management or something like that, that personal relationship can be very helpful in setting up the interview. I would not recommend that that person do the interview. You want to have kind of a third party who sits in on that interview and make sure that you're getting information that they're not afraid to share with somebody that they have a personal relationship with. But that personal relationship can often help set up that interview so that they know that this is something that, we're just trying to learn. If it's a trusted relationship, hopefully somebody will, want to show up on that in that regard.
If you've got any more questions, keep them coming in the chat. I've got one more that came in this week. When it comes to identifying at-risk customers, what would you recommend to an organization with very little customer behavior data or unorganized data?
Mm. What? Your data's not perfect? I'm so disappointed. Yeah, I don't know any organization that has perfect data. Some have a lot of data and they have interesting ways to go through it, but it's still not perfect. So if you don't have a lot of data, Thais brought this up in a beautiful way too. When there is still data available, if that's social media listening, if that's user forums, if that is looking at things like, renewal rates, retention rates, churn rate, all of those different calculations you can make. Sometimes by going through those calculations and looking, things become kind of obvious. And that sounds strange, but I've seen this happen where if you're not paying attention to customer churn, for instance, and everybody in your organization is really excited because your acquisition numbers, your sales numbers are doing really well, you're getting more and more customers, but you're not paying attention to the customers who are literally walking out the door in that same amount of time, which is what churn is, then you're going to miss opportunities to really dive in and figure out what's going on here. So if you're not paying attention to those metrics, that would be the first thing I would do is understand your customer churn rate, understand your retention rate, understand your renewal rate if you have a product that has renewal, understand feedback from your employees. They hear these stories. Reach out to your contact center, your customer service, your frontline workers, and ask them, say, hey, have you heard customers talking about leaving or getting frustrated and kind of threatening to leave? What triggers that? And really look into that. That can be a great place to start. If you have any sort of user or customer events, sometimes there are big events, especially around software for different customers. Hang out there, ask them, eavesdrop a little bit, sit with them at the events and say, I'm from the company. What do I need to know about this? So I think there are all these different ways where you can look for data when it feels like maybe you don't have access to it. You still have enough to get started. And you all have heard me say this before, but I'm not a purist about this stuff. Things do not have to be perfect. This is about progress over perfection. If you have never thought about customer churn before, the act of thinking about it, the act of calculating it will move things forward. That's sometimes where we need to start. These baby steps of, okay, we've never thought about neglect before. We've never thought about drifting at-risk customers before. So let's start thinking about that. Why would that happen? You can brainstorm with a team and say, why do we think our customers leave? And then go validate that. Use that to send some surveys or do some customer interviews or listen into contact center call recordings and things like that. So there's this whole spectrum of ways to get data. And I think sometimes we think data has to be with a capital D, where we say, it's got to be really organized. It's got to be driven by, very specific surveys. It's got to be driven by very operational metrics. That's all wonderful if you have that. But if not, just start where you are and figure out at least those key steps, because that alone will help you look at how do we understand these customers more and how do we serve them better.
We've got a question from Saptarshi joining us on YouTube that I really like. It's about how we can apply this practically. Under which section in a journey map should we put the exit interview, or how can we incorporate exit interviews into our customer journey map?
Great question. And I have that annoying answer because there's no perfect place. What I would do is look at your customer journey and determine where are the key milestones that would lead somebody to drift. So for instance, if you have a product that renews maybe annually, then you want to look at a few months before and see, okay, well, if usage drops 3 months before, are they more likely to leave us at the renewal date? Well, if you can identify something like that, then you want to put those interviews or put attention at that. But then you also know that, okay, if people aren't renewing, that's a great place for an exit interview. If you are approaching this as interviewing kind of before they leave, you might want to start talking to them before they actually get to that renewal point. So it's a little bit of a puzzle that you have to put together and make sure you're looking for those very specific milestones. So I hope that helps.
Let's talk B2B.
All right.
Question from Natasha. My clients are companies. What approach would you suggest I use to understand them? Similar to segmentation or persona mapping?
Yes. Okay. I love B2B questions. So when we talk about customers as company or clients as companies, I mean, this is true in my world too, right? Like ultimately I'm a B2B organization. But when you come to who you're actually serving, you have to make sure that you remember there are humans at the end of this. Humans are the ones making the decisions. They are the ones who are interacting with whatever product and service you provide. They are the ones who are recommending or not to other potential prospects. So when we look at, segmenting and personas and things like that, we want to get to that level of humanity, even with B2B. And in some cases, the B2B relationship is more personal than the B2C because they're longer term, There are layers, right? Like we have to sometimes go through a lot of layers, a lot of different departments. So with B2B, when you're thinking about journey mapping, when you're thinking about personas, all of those things, you want to make sure that you're kind of thinking about those layers. So that could be that the CEO is the one who signs the checks and makes the decision on the contract, but you're serving a different group of end users and you have some influencers in between who maybe influence that decision. You want to kind of break that down and think about the actual person at the end of that. Because if we think about our customers only as these brand names or only as these companies, it becomes less human, it becomes faceless and nameless, and we start making assumptions about the people instead of really understanding them. So my number one recommendation for B2B is think about the people. Think about that human at the end of it. But that's a great way to do it. Journey mapping for that CEO, journey mapping for that end user. Those are great techniques to use.
All right. One more question, at least for now.
Mhm.
This one's from Rhonda. Hey, Rhonda, I'm happy you're joining us.
Hi,
She
Rhonda.
says, I found Jeannie through an SAP webinar. Awesome content. My question is, what type of going consulting does your company offer other than the one-off training sessions? So maybe this is something, do you want to answer this off the video?
Yeah, that would be great. I mean,
Okay.
we do a whole bunch of different things, and
Yeah.
part of that is really guiding leaders in organizations to get to a point where they're running their CX program because that's our goal. We don't want to be there forever. We want to empower leaders to really deliver on their customer experience program. So we do that a bunch of different ways. So thanks for asking, Rana, and we'll follow up with you.
Absolutely. All right, so that will do it for today's Q&A. As a reminder, we do these every week. We'll be live next week again.
Mhm.
The week following that, we're going to be pre-recorded because, Jeannie, you're actually going to be at an in-person event in Vegas. Is
Crazy,
that right?
right? Yeah, in-person events are starting to come back. It will be my first flight in, I don't know, 18 months, something like that. And yeah, going to Vegas and get a little chance to get on a stage again. So that's pretty exciting.
Very cool. Well, Jeannie, where can folks find you?
Yeah, as always, we are so appreciative that you're here with us because, as you know, the mission of our company is to create fewer ruined days for customers. And by you being here, by you learning and getting empowered to deliver within your organizations, you are helping us live that mission. So thank you for being here today. As David mentioned, we're here pretty much every week live. Sometimes we have a pre-recorded one that we launch on Fridays as well. And then we have resources for you. Check out the resources at experienceinvestigators.com/resources. And if you haven't already, sign up for that year of CX, where we are providing free tools and resources for anybody who would like to participate that way. We will continue to release new resources until CX Day 2021, which is in October. So we have a few months left. So reach out however you'd like, but otherwise, please, go forward. Consider your at-risk customers. Consider those customers who are really feeling neglected because we're all human and none of us like that feeling. So our jobs as CX leaders, sometimes it's about bringing that attention and intention into that customer journey in the best ways that we know how. So thank you so much for being here. We'll be here again next week, and I look forward to seeing you then. Thanks, everybody.